Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Left off on Wednesday, we were talking about our three big kind of buckets of metabolic pathways, right? We have our immediate phosphagen system, so stored ATP in your muscles, creatine phosphate, the myokinase reaction. We talked about the non-oxidative pathway of glycolysis, okay? And then we talked about aerobic or oxidative pathways that are in your mitochondria. We're going to go through each one of these in excruciating detail, okay? Your eyes will bleed by the end of all of this, and I'm sorry, but it's really, really, really important, okay? So the next slide, I'm going to show you guys in some ways exactly what happened from which pathway were we using while you guys were doing your initial squat and hold. Okay, squat and hold. We've heard you. I'm going to try to write some explanations of the graphs in the notes section in PowerPoint for you guys. But what you see here in this figure is time on the x-axis. Okay, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, out to about 5 minutes. On the y-axis, it's the relative percentage of all of the ATP that you need to do that exercise. Okay, so use this as a reference. I'm going to squat and hold. Okay, and what you see is there's these three different lines that are on here. And so the solid black line is the immediate phosphagen system. The smaller dashes is glycolysis, and then the larger dashes is aerobic pathways or the oxidative pathways. Okay? And so what I want you to see here is that early on, in the first, say, 10 or 15 seconds of any bout of exercise, any movement, the vast, vast majority of the ATP comes from those immediate phosphagen systems. Okay? Comes from those immediate phosphagen systems. Stored ATP in your muscle is the first place thing we're going to use. That lasts about a second. Okay? Then you are immediately going to start breaking down the creatine phosphate to turn ADP back into ATP. You have enough creatine phosphate in your muscles for maybe, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 seconds of kind of very heavy all-out exercise. You've got it for a little bit longer for, if you're just going to squat your body weight and hold it, it probably lasts a little bit longer. Okay? But in an all-out kind of sprint, a maximal thing, you have enough creatine phosphate to last maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Okay? Once that stored ATP is gone, once that creatine phosphate is gone, we cannot use those two things again until we stop exercising and we replenish. So what we're left with then after the first, say, 10, 15, or maybe even 30 seconds is all ATP has to come from glycolysis and aerobic metabolism. Okay? All has to come from there. And so what you will note then, right, is if you look at glycolysis in the short dashes, it really ramps up as the immediate ones are falling down. It peaks out at about 45 seconds to a minute. But as it goes along, it's also going to drop off. Okay? It's also going to drop off. And then correspondingly, aerobic pathways have to increase and provide what's happening. Okay? The reason that glycolysis goes up, right, and then comes back down is primarily due to the thing it makes at the end, which is lactic acid. You increase the acidity inside of your muscle, and it shuts everything down. Okay? Basically, hydrogen inhibits everything. Everything. calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, calcium binding to troponin, myosin ATPase, cross bridge formation, the ability of circuit to pull calcium back in. Okay. It shuts all of those things down. And it makes your muscles burn. Anybody feel a little burn while you were holding that? That burn is from acidity. Okay? It's from the acidity. So you could only kind of maximally run glycolysis for a short-ish period of time, a couple of minutes, before that's going to run out and shut everything in. Okay? And so what you hope basically is, let's imagine that you could have held yourself down like this for say 30 minutes. Anybody think you can do that for 30 minutes? If I forced you to? Okay. Probably not. Most of you, right? It requires enough force from your quads to do that it actually squeezes the capillary shut and you can't get new fully oxygenated blood into the muscles, and that's why you fatigue pretty quickly. All right, but let's assume this was walking. Okay, this is walking. I walk the first 10 seconds or so when I'm walking, it's mostly immediate. The next couple of minutes, it's mostly glycolysis. And then it takes 2 or 3 or 4 minutes for the aerobic pathways to speed up and get going as fast as they can. And when I'm walking, in most of us, after about 2 or 3 minutes, the aerobic pathways can mostly provide almost all of the energy that we need. It's all about supply and demand. Okay. What is the force production demanding? And then which combination of pathways do I have to use to be able to meet that demand? Okay. A little bit from here, a little bit from there, a lot from aerobic means that we can actually continue that exercise or that activity for a long period of time. If it's really, really high, and I've got to use all of my stored ATP and all of my stored creatine phosphate and as much glycolysis as I can, then I can only sustain that while those things are available. And I'm going to have to stop within 30 seconds or a minute or something like that. Does that part make sense? It's all about supply and demand. Okay? We're going to go through every pathway, and I'm going to try to demonstrate to you guys why are some fast, why are some slow. Why can some speed up in some instances? Why do they slow down in others? Okay, right? And how does that speed of the pathway govern which one contributes when? Okay, but this is a general sort of thing. Stand up, start walking. You're using a lot of creatine phosphate, which you usually make enough because energy demand is so low that aerobic can meet it relatively well. Okay. All right. This is why this is a conceptually difficult sort of thing. Okay, we're going to start with our immediate pathways. What about the ones that go really, really fast? We're going to start by talking about the creatine phosphate pathway. Okay, outside of stored ATP in your muscle, this is the first pathway that we primarily use when we need more energy right now. And we use it first because it's fast. Okay, it's fast. And it's fast because it's a one-step reaction. Okay, it's a one-step reaction. Anybody take biochemistry? Okay, one person, 2 people that have had biochemistry. It's terrible. I know it's terrible. It's awful. It's not great, especially given how it's taught now here by some folks. Where you have to have had organic chemistry beforehand, right? We should make all of our PhD students take biochemistry. And then they've switched it in the last year or so to where they essentially teach it where you have to have had organic chemistry beforehand, which is not an absolute, I mean, it's made it much more difficult because of all of it, right? That's their choice, that's their right to do that. But it's already difficult, now you have to have organic. Someone that's taken organic chemistry, never used organic chemistry ever. Never used it ever. Okay. All of physiology is biochemistry. It's all biochemistry, right? That's all that it is. So biochemistry is really important. So we're going to do a little bit of biochemistry. Okay. I'm gonna drill down biochemistry to like the 2 minutes of things that you need to understand. Okay. Creatine phosphate pathway is fast because it's a one-step reaction. Biochemically, it's fast because of the enzyme that it has, and it only requires one step. Okay? Our other pathways, like glycolysis and the aerobic pathways, are slower because they have a whole lot more steps. And they require a whole bunch more enzymes to make them go. Okay? So, about 98% of all the creatine phosphate in your body is in your skeletal muscle. We talked about creatine loading the other day, but here's what this pathway looks like. Okay, I know we make you guys take chemistry. We're about to do a little bit of biochemistry, which is why all of this hopefully will make more sense. Okay, you've got creatine phosphate on one side of a reaction. As you break down the stored ATP in your muscle, you get ADP floating around inside of that muscle fiber. Okay? When you have ADP and creatine phosphate and they bump into each other in the presence of an enzyme that is called creatine kinase that drives this reaction, you pull the phosphate off of the creatine phosphate, you hook it onto ADP, and you make ATP and creatine. Okay? It's a simple one-step reaction driven by one enzyme. So all of biochemistry, or in some ways all of chemistry, is if something on the left side of the equation increases, it drives the reaction to the right. If something on the reaction on the right side goes up, it drives the reaction or can drive the reaction to the left. Okay? Or at least stop the reaction from going forward. So when you have high levels of ATP in a muscle, you don't break down creatine phosphate. When you use up that ATP and ADP goes up, it drives the reaction to the right. I will ask you this on the test. Okay? The single thing that primarily drives all metabolic reactions is increased levels of intra-fiber ADP. Okay? If I injected your muscles with ADP, right now, I can make your metabolic rate go up. Okay? It's increasing ADP, increasing it on the left side of all of our reactions, drives these things to the right. Okay?
Can you say that again?
Sure. The thing, the primary thing, the answer to all questions of what stimulates a metabolic reaction to make more ATP, the answer is increases in intra-fiber ADP levels. Okay? And we get an increase in ADP because we used ATP to generate force. You have a stored amount of ATP, you start using it up to generate force, so ADP goes up, we got to start making it back so we can keep going. Okay? Does that make sense? You see, if it doesn't make sense to you, I promise you, you're not alone. Put your hand up and tell me what doesn't make sense so I can try to explain it in a different way. Okay? But as ADP goes up, it drives all of our metabolic reactions. Okay? And that's all the biochemistry that you need to know. When something goes up on one side of the equation, it drives in the other direction. That's it. Okay? No need to take biochemistry. Right? The problem that we have with this is there's only a finite amount of creatine phosphate. And once it's all used up, we cannot make any more until you stop exercising. And then you start making it back. Okay? Who knows if you've had testing and prescription or some personal training, if I want to test my 1 rep max strength today, and I do a rep, how long am I supposed to rest before I do the next rep? 5 minutes. Okay. Anybody agree with it? It's longer, shorter? Don't think 5 is okay? Okay. Do you know where that 5 minutes came from? You know why it's 5, it's not 30 seconds? Or 2 minutes? It is indeed how long it takes. In most of you, in 5 minutes, you've resynthesized about 98% of your creatine phosphate. Okay? At 2 minutes, if you're not very aerobically trained, it's not quite as much. Resynthesis of creatine phosphate has a half-life of about 20 to 30 seconds. So like half of it is back in the first 30 seconds. And then in the next 30 seconds, another half is back. So now you're 75% back. Right? And on and on and on. Exponential kind of behavior. Right? 5 minutes, we're pretty comfortable. We've got most of it back. Okay? Those numbers were not just randomly decided. They have an underpinning in the products. Okay? So we have this limited store, but it's going to be there. We'll talk about this much later on in class, but if you want to be able to resynthesize creatine phosphate faster, if you want to recover metabolically faster during rest periods, you need more mitochondria. You need to be in better aerobic metabolic conditioning. You need to be in better shape. And then you recover faster. So the take home is all of you that want to do things, you're sort of an anaerobic athlete. You need to be in good aerobic shape so you can recover when you get a chance to rest. Right? Anybody watch the hockey last night? Okay. Skate hard, skate hard, skate hard, break, rest, right? You get like 30 seconds. You need to recover as fast as you can in that time. So you've got to be in good aerobic shape. Things like basketball, and hockey, and soccer, stuff where it's fast, high intensity burst, walk, rest, burst, walk, rest, go. You need to be in really good aerobic shape. Okay, so that's what we've got there. This reaction looks just like this. We've got PCR on the left, the enzyme, and you have to know this enzyme. I'm sorry, you just got to remember. The enzyme that combines with creatine phosphate and ADP that drives this reaction is called creatine kinase. Kinase denotes something that puts a phosphate onto something else. So you have PCR, so you've got creatine phosphate, ADP, and the creatine kinase enzyme. It splits the phosphate off of creatine, puts it onto the ADP, and we make ATP. Okay? So the rate of this reaction is primarily controlled by changes in ADP level. Okay? As ADP goes up, you have enough creatine phosphate and enough creatine kinase, and that's the thing that drives the reaction. Okay? That's the thing that drives this reaction. Very simple, one step. All you have to do with the people around you is one of you reaches over and taps the other person on the shoulder. One step reaction. Okay? One step reaction. Boom, touch, you told that thing what you told your neighbor what to do. That's it. There's not 17 steps to get across the room, where there's a chance for things to go wrong or misinterpret something or whatever else. That's why it's fast. That's why we use it immediately. You need the energy now. Use this now. Okay? Anybody in Dr. Pereira or Andrea's exercise physiology lab class? You guys done a Wingate test in there yet? You know what's called a Wingate test? No? Okay. You want to see something fun? Get on YouTube, look up Wingate test. Okay? A Wingate test is we put you on a bike with the resistance set at 70% of your body weight, and we say pedal as fast as you can for 30 seconds. Go as hard as you can go for 30 seconds. Okay? There are a few things in life that are as terrible as that. I'm serious. There are a few things that are worse. Okay? This is how we used to, and this was years ago, initiate the new graduate teaching assistants when I was a PhD student in Georgia. We do this in lab, in those classes. Somebody passes out or somebody pukes and you do it every time, right? It's just an all-out 30-second sprint. But the fun thing is, what you know, is you can see when their creatine phosphate runs out. They start off, and it's hard, but you're just like power output, you're going, and then it just goes, And after about 12 to 15 seconds, you're halfway done. So you're like, dear God, it's only been 12 seconds. But it bottoms out. And then they kind of hang on at the end. Because all their creatine phosphate's gone. Okay? And so you can see it really, really clearly in the test like that. Okay? It's very, very fascinating. That's creatine phosphate. That's that particular pathway. Okay? We talked some about resynthesis. Okay? We'll come back and do a little bit more about this with aerobic training, but we do something when you stop exercising called the creatine phosphate shuttle. Okay? The energy to resynthesize creatine phosphate all comes from aerobic metabolism. It all comes from ATP made in your mitochondria. So you make the ATP in the mitochondria and we shuttle it then right across the mitochondrial membrane, right back onto creatine. Okay? Right back onto creatine. And then we resynthesize. But we only do this once you stop exercising and demand drops. So that aerobic metabolism can supply all of that energy. So you can use it there rather than actually. Does that make sense? So recovery in between short bouts of high intensity exercise is enhanced by having a better functioning aerobic metabolism. Okay. All right. I'm going to show you something, and you don't have to know this, but I think it illustrates sort of what happens, again, from a biochemical standpoint, really, really well. What you see at the top, okay, this is recovery of creatine phosphate. On the left, we're inside of the mitochondria. We're making ATP in the mitochondria. There is weirdly another creatine kinase enzyme that sits in the membrane of the mitochondria, and it pulls the phosphate off of ATP and puts it back onto the creatine. So we shuttle it over here. Then that PCR, after you've remade it, can then be broken down again, also by creatine kinase, which I know is kind of weird, to be used during exercise. What you see here, again, more chemistry. For those of y'all that have had like Chem 1, do y'all do labs? Do y'all do anything where you did spectroscopy in labs and you got to like look at what was happening, like changes in different ion levels and those kinds of things at all? A couple of y'all are nodding for that. This, what you see in front of you, is spectroscopy, but it's done in an MRI machine. We put a person in the magnet and we have them exercise, and rather than imaging them to see what their muscle or their bone or something looks like, we're using the magnet and telling it to tell us what's happening with phosphate levels. Okay, very cool, right? But what you see is here you start off and you start exercising, and we infer creatine phosphate levels by changes in inorganic phosphate in the muscles. And so creatine phosphate levels fall. Boom, boom, boom. Exercise, exercise, exercise. They drop. You stop exercising, and then you measure it again, and you see this recovery curve that follows this sort of quadratic equation as it comes back up like that. Okay? And so it is based upon this curve. This is over about 10 minutes as we look out here during recovery. Is you can see then that at some point we're basically back, and then it stays constant, but the slope of this curve right here is determined by how many mitochondria you have in a muscle. So you can make that recovery curve steeper and faster if you have more mitochondria. Okay. This, the one on the left, they used, that was like a kind of a sub-maximal exercise. The one on the right is more maximal. You'll notice you use about 30% versus using about 50% of PCR on those things, okay? But this is how we know what happens from a recovery standpoint and from a use standpoint. We do experiments like this in the MRI machine. Okay? In the MRI machine. Now, we can sort of estimate this recovery curve in my lab, in Dr. Kellerman's lab, soon in Dr. Paddock's lab, and in Dr. Larson's lab, using oxygen levels in your blood. Okay? Doing some different things that's been called near-infrared spectroscopy. We can estimate some of this as well. So it's a pretty cool, pretty powerful thing. Okay. Okay. So that's creatine phosphate. While you're using the creatine phosphate pathway, you are very also likely using a separate reaction, but it's much, much less common. Okay, and the reaction is called the myokinase reaction. As ADP levels in the fiber rise because we're increasing force production or we're maintaining force production, you will get a different biochemical reaction where two ADP molecules come together, bump into the myokinase enzyme, and you pull a phosphate off of one ADP and put it onto the other one, and you make an ATP molecule, and then you have what's called an AMP, adenosine monophosphate, so it only has one phosphate left. Okay? We typically only do this in very, very high intensity exercise when ATP demand is very, very high. Okay? Because it's not great to strip an extra phosphate off the baby. But it does happen, and it does contribute a little bit, right? A little bit to high intensity exercise. Okay? Just a little bit. Okay. So that's myokinase. This table tries to summarize as best it can the relative availability of energy, okay, in your cells, in your muscle cells that are available from free ATP, from the myokinase reaction, and from creatine phosphate. So this is a summary of these immediate phosphagen systems, okay? And you don't have to know these numbers. I just want to demonstrate it to you from a relative sense, okay? This is estimating total calories relative to total muscle mass. Stored ATP, it's about 2, okay? Creatine phosphate, you will note, it's about 8.5, okay? So it's a little more than 4 times as much energy is available in creatine phosphate than what you have in stored ATP. Myokinase equivalent is about 1, okay? So even less than stored ATP, way less than creatine phosphate. Okay? There's a finite amount of energy in these systems. Okay? Their use is going to be really fast and typically within the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 seconds to maybe 15 or 20 seconds of exercise. Okay? They're fast because they're simple one-step reactions. Okay? That's why they go fast, but they're very limited. Right? You cannot sprint indefinitely. There used to be an online workout thing, and they would have infomercials, and it was called long duration high intensity interval training, which is stupid. By definition, if it's long duration, it cannot be high intensity, right? It can't. Those two things are incongruent with each other. If you're going to go for 5 minutes, you can't go as hard for 5 minutes as you can for 30 seconds. Okay, now we're going to stop here, but I want you to think about something as you try to leave class today. Do something. I'm going to illustrate a different point for you guys as you leave class. Okay. What I want you to do when you leave is, if you're on this side of the classroom, I want you to walk that way. If you're on this side of the classroom, I want you to walk this way. Now, what I want you guys to take from this, okay? What I want you to take from this is, if some of you on this side are ADP molecules, and those of you on this side of the classroom are creatine phosphate and creatine kinase molecules, if we have more people on one side versus the other, as you try to walk, the chances that you bump into each other go up. Okay, and that's why these reactions are going to try that. Please make sure you turn your stuff in. You guys have a good weekend. Make your choices. If you have questions, talk to Ty and I. We'll move on like that.
So, I'm working on getting this finished up. Like, the first page is over creatine phosphate, and this is the diagram. You have it on your slides, but it helped me a lot to understand the reaction of it all. I got questions